I sat on a couch, big and comfortable. I wasn't alone. There were 12 others like me, many of whom were crammed on this same couch. We'd driven 20 minutes to town and had lunch at McDonald's. We then walked for another 20 minutes to a third-floor apartment where we now sat, dirty and sweaty from the heat. Most of us were wearing shorts and t-shirts, but we were here to worship in China. That thought wasn't lost on me. Part of me wondered what I'd do if the Chinese government broke in the door and started arresting everyone. I was pretty sure I could outrun most of the 50-plus Chinese Christians that were crowded into that apartment, but getting off the balcony onto the first floor would be the challenge. What are we doing here? Better question, how did these people even know we were in Zigong and reach out to us? This house church was started 15 years ago by a missionary who was there for less than a year. These people have been without a church leader for a very long time. How do they know what to do? How do they know if they're doing it right? I started analyzing and even judging the things that they were doing. I was looking through my American Christian goggles and I saw the differences. The singing, they sang in unison, very deliberate, no four-part harmonies. Why didn't they sing like us? There's a lot of clapping, like in every song. Why do they feel the need to continuously clap? And then I stopped. Why am I doing that? Why do I think I have the perfect formula for worship? Why is my way of worship the litmus test for everybody else? I stopped right there and I said a prayer, and I asked for forgiveness for my judgmental attitude and for my heart not being focused on true worship. I opened my eyes again and listened. I had no idea what they were singing, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful because they sang like they believed it. They weren't going through the motions, focusing on hitting the notes right and keeping proper time. I doubt any of them were sulking because they hadn't sung any of the new songs yet. And they were smiling continuously. They were smiling in worship. I hardly ever see that. It was contagious, and I started smiling. I stood up and I walked outside for a moment. I didn't want them to see the tears in my eyes. I asked God to help me to always remember this moment, one of the purest worship experiences I've ever had. 3 hours later, we officially finished our worship time together. Too often, worship is focused horizontally, not vertically. We tend to focus on things that please us. Worship times are treated with the same doctrinal weight as communion. People complain if the preacher goes past 35 minutes because that means we'll have to wait longer at the restaurant. I wish I had $1 for every time a song leader came into the audio booth to make sure that I run their mic loud enough so they can hear themselves. My brothers and sisters in Zigong, they didn't have these discussions. They didn't have these problems. They met wherever and as often as they could. And if that meant they had to walk in the rain for 40 minutes or take public transportation to get there, so be it. A 2-hour sermon for them was a blessing because it meant there was someone in their midst with training, knowledge, and wisdom of the Word. Worship translates from several terms which involve bowing down, kissing toward, and showing reverence. Notice the vertical nature of these descriptions. Worship is for God. Our focus is on Him. Yes, there are proper acts of worship, and God demands those acts of us. Malachi chapter 1 has some very strong words to Israel for offering polluted sacrifices. Going so far as to tell them, I'd rather you shut the doors of the temple than continue offering vain sacrifices. We're often quick to point out the mistakes of others' worship practices, but don't forget, worship without the right heart is just as unacceptable. How often did Paul tell the Jewish Christians, you're focusing on the wrong things. Stop holding others to a standard that you can't even meet. When done right, emotion becomes a part of the worship process, but emotions should never drive the worship. We can't start doing things just because they elicit an emotional response. This is just as horizontally focused as those mentioned earlier. We have a responsibility to focus on the Creator during worship. True, unadulterated worship involves humility, a penitent heart, awe, and reverence for the Creator, and a love and compassion for those around you. True worship involves pattern and order, but don't sacrifice heart in the process. A writer once said, "Make sure you aren't so far to the right that you have no heart, and so far to the left that you have no head." A good friend of mine once asked, how would our worship change if Jesus walked in during our service? Would we feel more emotion? Would we experience more joy? And yet, He's there every time we gather together. So sing with the joy of a freed prisoner. Pray with the heart and humility of a child. And remember Christ's communion like you were the one who pierced His side. You can't fake your way through worship. You can't stand before God and go through the motions and expect Him not to see right through you. Take some time. Take some time to discuss true worship. Identify the patterns and the expectations set forth by God through Scripture, while at the same time, analyze the heart